Welcome to those of you umochurch.tv again. You can download the Bible app for free, and you want to go to Proverbs chapter 4. That's where we're going to get eventually. So years ago, my wife Shannon and I lived in the Virginia suburbs of D.C., and I was an associate minister at a church there for 8 years. And the cool thing about our church is it led the nation in people who couldn't tell you what they did for a living. And that's just how it was. So we had this one guy he was a retired FBI dude. His name is Ron Ferguson. And he's this lovable, awesome Christian dude. He was retired by this time. But when he was in the FBI, he was kind of the equivalent of a 4-star general in the FBI. He wrote the manual on the polygraph. I mean, this dude was sharp. But there would be this tour. You could go to the FBI headquarters, the J. Edgar Hoover building, and you get a tour if you were just some regular peasant. But I knew Ron Ferguson. So there was kind of an inside tour of the Hoover building. And there were actually literally times where you're walking your path with your little private tour of people who I guess know somebody, and you would be on the other side. There'd be a window of other people who were on like the outside tour, and you'd be like, sorry guys, don't feed the animals. It's like, we're Fast Pass at Cedar Point, these suckers over here, you know. And so it was really, really cool. But one time my mom came to visit us, and it was the first time she came to visit us from Toledo, Ohio, where I grew up. She came out to visit us in D.C. for her first time after we moved there. And so right when you walk in the Hoover building, like Scully or Mulder, you walk in and then there's this metal detector. And this was back in the day before people even carried flip phones. Like cell phones were not a big deal at that time. It wasn't quite rotary phone era, but it was landline era, not cell phone era. So you walk in and there'd be this metal detector and you would just walk through with all your handbag, anything you had, you walk through with it. So we walked through, for me, no occasion. We walked through for my wife, no situation. My mom walks through. I mean, everything. It's the Hoover building. So, I mean, agents, cops, officers, ninjas are popping out from everywhere. And my mom is kind of like, she's got this big old purse. She's like, oh, I don't know what's going on. That's going to be the voice I'm going to use for my mom in this clueless story. I don't know what's going on, what's happening or whatever. So she looks a little worried, confused. And an officer, ma'am, could you step over here? I'll never forget this phrase. We've detected a large metal mass in your purse. Like, golly, is my mom a gangster? Like, what in the world is that? So they pull my mom aside. Somebody starts going through it. A guard, a ninja's over his shoulder, just waiting with a throwing star, you know, just waiting. And so he's digging through, and she's like, what could it be? I just can't even imagine what it'd be. There was a moment, I will admit, when they were digging through her purse that I thought somebody might reach in and just pull out a Saturday night special that I never knew my mom had and be like, who is my mom? And she's like, say hello to my little friend, and goes nuts. And I'll be like, I did not see this coming all my life, but my whole life has been leading up to this moment where my mom could infiltrate the Hoover building. So I was a little freaked out. Finally, the officer started to reach into her bag, and my mom was like, you know, what could it be? Oh, it's probably that. And he pulls out this makeup bag that was as big as most ladies' purses, that was huge. And when he lifted it, you could tell he was visibly shaken by the weight of it. He was like two dudes had to come from the corner and be like, I'll grab this end. They lift it up out of her purse using their legs properly. And it's this big, and he pops it open, and inside is like $6 million worth of silver coins. What is that, Mom? Like, what in the world? And she's like, yeah, I'm so sorry. So he looks through it, digs through the change awkwardly, like, gotta wash your hands afterward awkwardly, digs through it, and he's like, okay, you're all clear to enter the Hoover building. He gets his friends, they lift it, put it back in her purse. She grabs it, just throws it on her arm, heads in, and I walk in. As soon as we get out of like earshot, I can see the look on my mom's face like, my son is about to make fun of me right now. Oh, you know, Mom, what are you doing with a bag of that much silver in your bag? She says, well, I have it for vending machines. Did you think we weren't going to feed you when you showed up? Like you're just going to be living off hot fries and Reese's cups? Like, man, so that was pretty funny to me. And then she went on and she said this, and I thought this was a very valid point, very witty of my mom. She said, well, the funny thing is to me, I got on a plane to fly to the nation's capital. And no one cared about a large metal mass inside of my bag for the flight. And I was like, this is very true. That was pre 9/11. I mean, if we're in the just post rotary phone era, that's pre 9/11. And so, just to warn you, my mom is coming to visit sometime this summer. Don't know when yet. But there might be a new thing added to the Confiscated Weapons Hall of Fame at the Cleveland Hopkins International Airport. You know what I'm talking about? You go in and there's like throwing stars and a grenade, things that have been confiscated. My mom's makeup bag full of change is going to be in there by the end of the summer. Oh, what could it be? Oh, it's probably that, this large metal mass. So beware for that coming later this summer. So there's a guy whose name is Daniel Levitin, and he's a former rock musician and a former studio engineer, producer. But today, he actually is a neuropsychologist with a PhD. So music background, now he's like Mr. Brains. And so he studies the neuroscience of music and how music impacts, hear this, how music impacts our mental and physical health. So science. And he's also the author of a New York Times best-selling book a few years ago called This Is Your Brain on Music. I love that. This is your brain on music. So he says the average person listens to about 5 hours of music a day. Now, I wanted to act shocked by that, and I was like, yeah, that's about right. Yeah, that's about right. Like, because when I do my time with God in the morning, I listen to, like, serious, like, classical music. And then, like, all during the day when I'm prepping for a sermon, if I'm prepping or writing something, I have this gigundous playlist of, like, old-school Christian hip-hop that I listen to, stuff I listened to when I first became a Christian and for several years after that. And so, anyways, the last 5 years, he says, there's been these more controlled scientific experiments of things that we always say about music, but now they're doing these controlled experiments, scientifically. And he says things that we've learned are that music can actually change your brain chemistry. And he says it can increase immune system functions. Like, there's some healthy things, obviously, can come from music. He said it can alter pain thresholds. Like, oh, give me more. Like it changes how much pain you can take. And then he says that also physically, it affects your heart rate, your respiration rate, and not much of a surprise here, your immediate mood. It changes your mood. It alters your mood. So, for instance, fast, upbeat, energetic, driving music or whatever, it stimulates the production of adrenaline and other hormones in your body that it gets your heart racing faster. And so your pulse increases. Your blood pressure increases from listening to this music. And it's just from listening to it. In fact, I know some runners. One lady is a runner at Momentum. Her name is Mary Suter. I remember her telling me years ago, I was recording songs in the studio, and she was like, you need to make more songs that are between 120 and 140 BPMs, because that's what runners run to. Shut up, Mary. No. But she was like, she let me know that's what runners like to run to. I was like, oh, that does make some sense. Like, I'm not listening to some acoustic set when I'm running. I'm like, I want something that like has a beat, something that's moving, because I'm dying on this treadmill. So that makes sense. So, and then of course, on the other side, soothing, relaxing music has the opposite effect. Like, I'm trying to wind down. Some of you go to sleep with music, like you listen to headphones or just put, radio next to your bed. You listen to something, and so it calms you down. So Dr. Daniel Levitin says this. He says, we're in a time when people are using music as medicine. He said they're using music much as they use drugs. So he said basically music is a drug. So picture it this way. Music is something you reach for depending on what you're looking for your mood to be at that moment. Like, man, right now, I'm waking up in the morning, so I'm reaching for a certain kind of music because it's like my caffeine to wake me up, get me going in the morning. See the correlation? And he's like, man, like right now, I want to distract myself with the monotony of sitting in this cubicle at work. Or it's 2 p.m. and my pancreas has released insulin into my body from lunch, and I'm like, oh my gosh, to get through this day. And so I reach for a certain kind of music to wake me up, get me going. I reach for a certain kind of music to get me fired up for this triceps workout. I reach for, something to fuel my anger when I am ticked at something that someone just said to me, did to me when I was a kid, and I'm thinking about it right now. And I reach for a certain kind of music to help me cuss them out better, like in my own privacy of my car or my room. I reach for certain type of music when I'm hosting a party or an event or grilling out. I got a picnic, a Mo group. I reach for a certain kind of music there. I reach for a certain kind of music when I am about to relax after a hard day's work. Some people, maybe in an unhealthy way, reach for a glass of wine. Some people reach for a certain type of music, and it's like, man, it's time to chill. Okay, I'm chilling. Bob Marley once said, one good thing about music is when it hits you, you feel no pain. Now, I don't know if he was the music or it was the ganja, but might have been a little bit confused right there. But the truth is, I agree with Bob Marley. I totally get it. Like, man, there are times where music is that thing that soothes the beast. It soothes you. And like, man, this is what I need to kind of calm myself, chill out. And so according to surveys, large numbers of people are in effect programming music to suit their desired mood outcome. Man, that's what I want to feel right now. Therefore, that's the playlist I'm going to right now. So they're using music for mood regulation. So here's why I'm saying this. Throughout the pandemic, it's been so great to see more people face to face and hang out with more people, and now a lot of your faces are going commando. It's really, really cool. And so it's been cool to kind of reconnect with people, see people, but so many people have told me, man, I have been struggling for the last several months. Understandably, right? And some people, it's not the pandemic. Some people, it is the pandemic and all the things. There's so many things going on in our country, but then personal things that are going on. Man, I've really been struggling. My mental health has not been good over the last year, and this has been going on and on. So if you struggle or have struggled with mental health, here's one thing is you can't afford not to pay attention to what you are listening to. The series is about Bring the Noise. And so we're taking a little different direction. Last 2 weeks we talked about praising God for the celebrations in your life and praising God even when things are awful in your life. And now we're kind of taking a little turn. But if it's true that music is like a drug or it's like a medicine that we reach for because we want to alter our mood or get into a certain mood or whatever, and if it's true that it affects you physically and emotionally and spiritually, if it's true that it alters your mood, if it's true that your body and your mind kind of sync to the type of music that you're listening to, then you can't afford not to pay attention to what you're constantly putting in your ear, what kind of noise you're bringing. You can't afford not to. And I know, like, the adult response is to say, oh, this is great with the graduates thing today. This is good for the children. You get my mom's voice right now for thinking this. This is great for the kids. Oh, I love when he talks to the kids. I'm talking to you. You have struggled mentally. You've struggled spiritually maybe. And it's just something to be mindful of, to say, what kind of noise is going into my eardrums? What kind of noise? And so if you say, man, I'm not affected by that. I just listen to the beat, that old thing. I just listen to the beat. Thanks, Mom. No, science disagrees. You don't just listen to the beat. Your mood, your body, your emotions sync in some way with that music. And so as a pastor right now, as silly as this might seem, I feel like I need to fight for you a little bit to say, if you're struggling, if you have struggled, this is just something you have to be mindful of, to pay attention to. You never outgrow being affected by the noise and the sounds and the things that are put into your mind. So Proverbs chapter 4, there's a wise, godly father. I wish I could cover a whole bunch of this passage, but we're going to zoom in on one part. There's a wise, godly parent. He's a wise, godly teacher, but he is a godly father speaking to his son in this passage. And he says this, keep my words, which you mentioned in a previous verse here, keep my words within your heart, son, for they are life to those who find them, and health to one's whole body. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Other translations for that ending part say things like, it determines the course of your life. Or if you have grown up around the Bible, learning scripture at all, the thing you might go to in your phrase, if you know this verse at all, is, it is the wellspring of life. And so basically what's going on here is these are words of wisdom from a godly person, a dad in this case, and he's saying, man, words of wisdom given to you can protect you from harm, and they can lead you to a life of health for your whole body. And so what he means here by health to one's whole body is physical health, mental or emotional health, and spiritual health. Like, that's literally what he's encompassing with whole body. all those things. And then the kicker is he says, above all else, you need to guard your heart. Now, in Bible and ancient times, it's a little confusing for modern readers because really, when they said heart, it was a symbol for what we would call the mind. And so the heart, it's the rational, intellectual, decision-making element in the person. When we think today of a heart, it's not what they thought. We think of the emotional, the affectional element, like a middle school girl say, I love him with all my heart, and I'm going to write it on my notebook. I love him with all my heart. And so that's not what we mean. And so to kind of help with that, I'm going to try to say your heart mind, just to remind you, like, oh, for us, this is about our intellect and our decision-making machine, that kind of stuff. And so that's what it's talking about when it says guard your heart mind. Like, you got to guard it. And so when you receive godly wisdom in your heart mind from, say, a godly father, how valuable are those? From, say, a mentor, spiritual mentor, from reading directly from God's word, it gets in there, and then you got to guard it. You got to be like, no, this is true. This is what God says. This is what God told me about multiple things. This is true. I got to guard it. So your heart mind obviously determines what you think and what you believe and what you decide is true and how you see the world and how you move out into the world. So you got to guard your heart mind. That's a big, big deal because it's the starting point for all the activities of life, is the wellspring of life. The last few years, I've read a couple books by a Christian philosopher whose name is Andy Crouch. There's a great gospel singer and writer whose name is Andre Crouch, so I almost have to look at his name every time so I don't say Andre Crouch. And then I have a friend whose last name is Couch. I'm really confused by this guy's name. So I always have to cheat sheet, so I brought the book up here. And so one of the books, I'm on it my second time through with this one, it's called Culture Making. And one of the things he talks about in here is the 4 different postures that Christians, especially American evangelical Christians, have kind of had with broader culture. Like, what's our posture toward broader culture? How do we respond to it? What's our posture toward it? And he offers, it's alliterated for your pleasure. There's 4 C's. That he's like, okay, each point begins with C. And so the first C is, he says, there's those who condemn culture. And that's especially kind of like the fundamentalist Christian idea. And so fundamentalist Christians, they would kind of withdraw from society. They would live more of a sanctified life with their own. We don't really have to worry about that stuff because we don't do that stuff here. And so they would define holiness as really not doing certain activities, right? It would be kind of in a negative sense. We don't dance. We don't listen to secular music, mainstream music. We don't go to the movies. We don't play those dangerous card games or billiards, okay? Some of you know what I'm talking about. And so that's what really fundamentalist Christians would do. So they would completely condemn culture. Then there's another group that would critique culture. Kind of the main person for this a generation ago was this really brilliant guy named Francis Schaeffer. He really loved high art and philosophy and music and film. But anyways, his idea was like, man, we should engage. And that became a buzzword. We engage culture. And that really simply just means to think about. Like, we should think about what's out there in culture, analyze it, critique it. And so what Andy Crouch says, I had to look at the book, Andy Crouch says the problem with that is that reflection didn't really produce much action or transformation. There was a lot of good thought that came out of it, but that posture was really analyzing, or the C, was critiquing culture. So condemn, critique. The next one, which if you've been a part of the church at all, you've probably been exposed to this, and that's copying culture. And so in the late 1960s and in the 70s, there was a Christian movement called the Jesus Movement. And they started bringing electric guitars and drums into worship. Thank you, Jesus Movement, because I brought some turntables back in the day too. And so they brought that in there, and they said, why should the devil have all the good music? And so they said, we can rock out too. We can spit rhymes too. We can do all this. Like, we can do that stuff too. We just take the form and change the content. And then eventually that became a whole industry that we call the CCM movement, contemporary Christian music. And there's even subgroups there's punk, hip hop and all that. But they would take that form and say there's nothing wrong with this form, which is true. And they would change the message or the content. And so that really, the posture there that was really like uncritically welcoming any cultural form that culture had. And they would embrace it and change the content. And I remember when I first became a Christian, right at the end of the 80s, going into the 90s, you could find charts that would say, if you like Hootie and the Blowfish, you might like Christian band Third Day. If you like Cypress Hill, oh, I like Cypress Hill, you might like Christian rapper T-Bone. And that's what they would do. And often the truth is, it wouldn't be, hey, I'm creating something. It would be like, crap, here's what's popular. Let's make it sound just like this, but give it different content. Not all bad, but it is a posture toward culture. So then he gets to the last one, Andy Crouch. Andre, man, I love Andre Crouch. Andy Crouch, he presents the present posture that he thinks is the most popular currently among American evangelical Christians. And he writes this: "It has become fashionable in many Christian circles to make fun of CCM, contemporary Christian music, and, or Christian metal or Christian hip hop. I love those. The truth is that, like critique and even condemnation, copying culture, like CCM does, is a posture toward culture that is alive and well in American Christianity. But it has been superseded by a simpler approach. And the simpler approach is this: simply going straight to the source, secular culture itself. The dominant posture among self-described evangelicals today toward culture is neither condemnation nor critique, nor even CCM's imitation or copying, but simply, and here's the fourth C, consumption." And what he says here is the fundamentalists say, don't go to the movies. Fundamentalists, don't go to the movies. You might get caught up in a pool hall or something, Don't go to the movies. The evangelicals said, hey, go to the movies, but especially black and white movies like Ingmar Bergman, and probe their worldview. Then, he says, experimenters in the CCM style film would say, go to Christian movies like Courageous, Fireproof, God's Not Dead, and soft-focused retellings of the gospel message using cinematic form. And so, he goes on to finish like this. He says, but most evangelicals today, they no longer forbid going to the movies, nor do they engage in the earnest Francis Schaeffer style critiques of the films that we see. We simply go to the movies, and in the immortal words of Keanu Reeves, say, whoa. We walk out of the movie theater amused, titillated, distracted, or thrilled, just like our fellow consumers who do not share our faith. If anything, when I'm among evangelical Christians, he says, I find that they seem to be more avidly consuming the latest offerings of commercial culture than many of my non-Christian neighbors. More than my non-Christian neighbors, he says. They're content to just be like their fellow Americans. Now, what he's saying here is this: the evangelical present tense is just consuming without much or any evaluation. Like, we don't do at all what Francis Schaeffer talked about, like, hey, think of it. We don't do at all what the fundamentalists say, like, every once in a while, maybe that isn't something I should consume. We don't do any of that. We just consume and don't think. So he says we're amused, entertained, aroused, distracted, thrilled, just like people who don't share our faith. And we're not thinking much about it, in his opinion. So here's my point. If this is true, if it's true, if what he's saying is true, and you struggle emotionally, or you're struggling to move forward spiritually, you can't afford not to pay attention to what noise is going into your eardrums, to what messages and noise you're hearing in music, film, talk, radio, television, Netflix, Hulu. You can't afford not to pay attention and just consume without thinking or evaluating at all and just being entertained. That noise affects your values, beliefs, morals, appetites, and your immediate mood. It does affect that. A few years ago, I was having coffee in Brecksville with a friend of mine. He's an adult dude, and he has a younger brother, but his younger brother is an adult too. And I know both of them, and I'm friends with both of them, but I was having coffee with the older brother, and on the way out, we had coffee for a couple hours chilling. And on the way out, on the way to the car, I said, dude, how's your brother doing? His younger brother had just been through something. It was like the most devastating event in his life, and it was a failure. And I talked to his brother, a few months before, and his brother, suffering from this failure, was like, man, I'm so embarrassed. I don't know where to move from here. I don't know what to do. I really screwed up. I really blew it. So I asked older brother, how's your younger brother doing? He was like, man, he's just so depressed. He's like in such a dark mood all the time. He's just not getting out of this funk. He's not getting around people. He's not re-entering into like a Christian community where people can encourage him and he can be around truth and love and people hugging on him and helping him get back on the right track and all that kind of Matt Foley, get back on the right track. And so just like none of that stuff, he's just in this dark place. And then as a brother, he evaluated, he said, but what breaks my heart is he's in this dark place And all three of us, the three of us, love entertainment and stories and film. And we even like really dark films and some horror and different things like that. He goes, but my brother right now, it's like all he's doing is he's on a screen at home. And when he's not working, he's watching Netflix. And it's this gloomy, depressing stuff. And he would tell me the titles and the names. And for where he's at right now, that's what he's consuming right now. I'm worried because he's stuck and he's so depressed. And it was like, he was just saying like, man, he's not thinking about what he's consuming. There's no way that he's saying, I got to guard myself right now. I'm in a really sensitive place. And you just keep watching these series that were all about human depravity and darkness and sadness and depression and all this stuff. And he had no strategy to reconnect with God, hope, purpose, mission, none of it. So this is what I'd submit to you is the idea of a metal detector just means that what's on the other side of that metal detector is something very valuable. It's something very precious, something that needs to be protected, right? Like metal detectors are when you walk into middle schools and high schools sometimes now. They're what you walk through when you go into an airport. You know, they're what you walk through when you go through into the Hoover building. Like something inside needs to be protected. This is valuable. This is sensitive, needs to be protected. And the same is true of your heart-mind. The same is true of your heart. And I want to fight for your heart-mind right now a little bit. You can say, oh, there was some fundamentalism in that or whatever. Well, I'm going to put the fun back in fundamentalism, okay? No, I'm not a fundamentalist at all. But I do think you need to think, you know, and just to think about what you're consuming. And to think, man, this is valuable. Like what I think and what I believe in my current mood and all that stuff, it's valuable. And I want to fight for that for you a little bit right now. Just to say, man, there's something valuable in there that stuff needs to go through the metal detector to get in there. Like you need to be thinking and evaluating and filtering and guard it because it's valuable. Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart mind. Guard it. Everything. It's the wellspring of life. And so you need to be aware when something's getting through that filter that's a weapon against your heart mind. When something gets through, that's a large metal mass. Like that is not something I need to hear right now. That's not something I need to see right now. I'm no fundamentalist, but it's a good thing every once in a while to say, I'm going to turn off this song. It's ticking me off. It's ticking me off right now. I'm already ticked, and that's making me more mad. Do you know what I'm talking about? So like, man, it's an okay thing to every once in a while. It doesn't make you a fundamentalist Christian with a dress past your ankles and you're not allowed to dance. If you every once in a while say, you know what, I think this series, it's crossing the line for me. I'm going to start a new series on Netflix. And that's all I'm talking about, is what's in here is valuable. You need to fight for it, especially if you're struggling. You got to fight for it. You got to take ownership. In Philippians 4, there's a Christian leader named Paul. And I want you to picture in this passage, Paul, a first century Christian leader, just fighting for your heart, mind, and soul in this passage. And he says this, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And he goes on as an example to say, you know, whatever you've learned or received or heard from me, I'm like your spiritual wise father to a proverbial metaphorical son here. Whatever you've heard from me or seen in me, put that into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. If you have this metal detector set up and the stuff that you let get through is true and it's lovely, it's admirable, there's going to be this sense of the peace of God, you know, reigning in your heart if you follow Jesus, and you're protecting and guarding that with your mind, heart. You know, when you look back at that first slide, true means something that's valid or reliable or honest. So let that stuff get through the filter, stuff that's true. You know, stuff that's noble, that means honorable, worthy of respect. It's actually the opposite of cheap or vulgar. Those are the opposites. Right means obeying the divine standard. It's upright, it's just. Pure means free from sin. You know, it's centered on God. Lovely just means like pleasing or agreeable. And admirable means not offensive. It's praiseworthy. It rings true to the highest standard. And Paul's saying, man, you got to let that get through the filter. You got to put more of that in. There needs to be more input into your heart mind that's true and admirable and right and pure, lovely, and that kind of stuff. And then you'll have a lot more of the peace of God if you're listening to the wisdom of God. And so when you think about that and consume the kind of stuff with those characteristics, the peace of God will be with you. So my goal this morning is this. You can take a deep breath here, because my goal this morning is not to present you with an exact filter. My point is just to fight for you to say, will you have a filter? Will you fight for yourself to say, this is valuable. I need a metal detector that when something starts coming through that I say, man, that's just not true at all. You might turn it off, or you might just say, I just acknowledge that that's not true. I don't agree with that. That's not true. I can continue to watch or listen, but I don't agree with that. That's not godly wisdom. Beep, ninjas come out. Okay? Like, that's the filter. Like, I'm going to cut things off. So I'm just trying to urge you to have one or start developing one. Because some of you would say, I've never even heard any conversation about thinking about what I consume. Like, that's just entertainment. That's just this or whatever. I think science would disagree with that, and God would definitely disagree. You have got to guard your heart above all else. So you get to decide what gets through the metal detector. And metal detectors are different, right? Like, the airport let the large metal mass get through with my mom, but it didn't at the Hoover building. So there are different metal detectors. And sometimes there might be, yeah, that one was right and that one was wrong. Some of us just have different filters of the kinds of things that we can process, or the kinds of things that we can hear and say, nope, I'm firmly rooted. I know what the truth is, and that's not truth. So I don't want to create your filter for you, but would you work on what is my filter, especially when something needs to be guarded? Especially when you need to be fighting for your spirit and for your heart, mind. And maybe as you grow spiritually, as all of us will continue to do, hopefully, 5 years from now, you'll look back sometimes and say about something, man, at that point, I didn't realize it, but I was kind of fighting to hold on to something that I shouldn't have been holding on to. And it was a weapon against me that was getting through the metal detector, and it was wounding me and harming me. And I was making this person, this artist, this musician, this film producer, whatever, I was making them like a hero, and somehow they were confiscating they were smuggling in weapons into my heart, mind, and I didn't realize it, but now 5 years later, I realize that I can detect that now. So my vision for you this morning is just, what if you consciously guarded your heart, mind, paid attention to what you consumed, and what if you realize you're protecting something valuable above all else? So that you might say, that song, for instance, that artist, it doesn't get into my ears. It doesn't get into my playlist. It doesn't get into my heart, mind, especially right now for some reason, because when I hear that, it makes me sad and depressed. Like, is that true? You know, when I hear that, it makes me angry, more angry about something that happened 20 years ago. When I hear this, it's messages for me, and what I take is that I give the middle finger to the rest of the world. That's the message I get from. That's what I want to do. I want to chase money, or I want to fight. I have songs that make me want to fight. Don't you? Maybe you got a different temperament than me. There are songs that make me want to jack somebody with an elbow. Start getting, man, he got him with a good UFC elbow. There's songs that make me want to fight. There's songs that make me want to pity myself. There's songs that make you want to blame your parents. There's songs that make you want to declare that you're self-made. You've done it all on your own. You don't need anybody else. There's songs that give you those wrong, completely incorrect attitudes. And you say, man, when I hear this, I feel hopeless. And so it's a weapon against my spirit. Beep. It doesn't make it through right now. Like, I just can't right now. That's a large metal mass. But what if the things that made it through were things, and this exists, and I'm not saying you got to go all CCM or all Christian or all worship music, but there are songs that make you thankful, right? There are songs that make you feel like worshipful. There are songs that reinforce the truth. There are songs that remind you to put God over money or pleasure or comfort. There are songs that make you joy-filled. There are songs that reinforce that you are valuable and that you're worth something because God sent his son Jesus to lay down his life for you. There's songs that reinforce that. There's songs that get you fired up with boldness, like, man, I want to have faith like that. There's songs that make you feel hope-filled. there are songs, and those songs are true and beautiful and worthy. Sometimes you really need to start opening up the gates to say, that's what gets through the filter. For the sake of your health, be really aware, sometimes even be really crazy, picky what gets through, and fight for yourself. Let's pray.